Everyone, and welcome to Bible study for the 22nd of September of 2021. I'm the Reverend James Merriam. Welcome to this time together. Whoever you are and wherever you are in life's journey, you are welcome in part of this study. You are welcome in access to Scripture. You are welcome in this chance to reflect and consider a piece of Scripture that we otherwise might not get the chance to talk about or look at in any kind of depth. Now, we're going to be reading from the book of Numbers, chapter 11, a piece of scripture that I think some of us will have looked at before, and a piece of scripture that's going to be probably doubly familiar because it actually includes basically two overlapping stories. Stories which are one is sort of distinctive but similar to other stories in scripture, and one is actually a repetition really of almost the same kind of a thing that happens multiple times during the journey from Egypt into the promised land, the time and journey of Moses, and really was kind of Moses's one of many frequently recurring issues that Moses encountered with the Israelites as they wandered in the desert. So these two stories are sort of interwoven, and in this week's lectionary, what's suggested is that we sort of piece out one from the other. So we have three separate sections from this text that are sort of read just blip blip blip, cutting out what's in between, and we're going to read the whole text going through to sort of resolve both stories at once, because they are sort of intrinsically intertwined, and there's some interesting aspects of how things are translated and actually how things are not translated that we'll get into. But anyway, it's just a few notes. It's of course been a good quite a week at the United Church of Newport. Last Saturday was the famous chicken pie supper, which we did as a to-go meal. It went very, very well. We were very glad about that. On Sunday, that was on Saturday, and on Sunday we said goodbye to our longtime lay minister, Janet Wiseman, who's moving out of the area, and we celebrated that. We took a special offering for the Children's Organ Transplant Association, which is to celebrate Janet, and especially because of the close relationship she has with her granddaughter, Ava, who has been a beneficiary of that organization. We had just a good time together on a beautiful day, and we continue as a community to do the best we can to serve, to work, to help, and to just be. Of course, we also have the good news that our Friday meals will be continuing through the end of the year. We will be partnering with Newport Natural Cafe to bring meals for everyone who would like one to go every Friday at 10:30. So that's continues to be something we offer. Any person can pick up for anyone else. So that will be through the end of the year. That was a program that was sort of a short program from that started a little over a year ago. Has become a great service, and has become one of the great successes, not only in Vermont but really sort of the nationally of triply beneficial stimulus programs, helping programs, service programs that the state of Vermont has put together, and we've been really proud and really happy to be a big part of this. So, Numbers chapter 11. The book of Numbers is the fourth out of the 5 books of Moses, the 5 books of the Pentateuch that are known as the Torah, the law, that begin our scripture, begin the Old Testament. It's called the fourth book. Really, the second, third, and fourth book, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, are all one book, all one story, broken up by where it's practical, based on the size of scrolls many centuries ago. And so it's 3 scrolls of sort of the story of Moses, and each of those 3 scrolls is identified by what is being talked about at the beginning of that scroll, thus what would have showed up on the outside of that scroll. Numbers begins with a census. It starts when the people have been at Mount Sinai for quite a long time, but still have quite a ways to go before entering the promised land. Deuteronomy, of course, is by a separate author, written for a separate reason, and really doesn't constitute a very long span of time in the 40 years that goes from the departure from Egypt, pretty near the beginning of Exodus, to the entrance into the promised land, which does not actually happen until after the Torah has even ended, and into the book of Joshua, which is The book of Joshua, which is usually not considered part of the Torah, is considered the first in the Hebrew arrangement, the first of the books of the prophets. So, Numbers chapter 11, we'll start at the beginning and we'll read through, I think it's verse 31, which is a little bit before, a little bit after, and including all the gaps in what would be included in the lectionary text. And the people became complainers of evil in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord heard, and his wrath flared, and the Lord's fire burned against them and consumed along the edges of the camp. And the people cried out to Moses, and Moses interceded with the Lord, and the fire sunk down. And he called the name of the place Taberah, for the Lord's fire had burned against them. And the riffraff that was in their midst felt a sharp craving. And the Israelites too again wept and said, "Who will feed us meat? We remember the fish we used to eat in Egypt for free, the cucumbers and melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic, and now our throats are dry. There is nothing save the manna before us." And the manna was like coriander seed, and its color the color of bdellium. The people would go out and gather it and grind it between millstones, or pound it in a pestle and cook it in a cauldron and make it into cakes, and its taste was like the creaminess of oil. And when the dew would come down on the camp at night, the manna would come down upon it. And Moses heard the people weeping by its clan, every man at the entrance of his tent. And the Lord's wrath flared fiercely, and in Moses' eye it was evil. And Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you done evil to your servant, and why have I not found favor in your eyes to put the burden of all this people upon me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give birth to them, that you should say to me, 'Bear them in your lap as the guardian bears the infant, to the land that you swore to their fathers'? From where shall I get meat to give all these people, where they weep to me, saying, 'Give us meat that we may eat'? I alone cannot bear this people, for they are too heavy for me. And if thus you would do to me, kill me, pray, altogether, if I have found favor in your eyes, and let me not see my evil fate." And the Lord said to Moses, "Gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, of whom you know that they are the elders of the people and its overseers, and you shall take them to the tent of meeting, and they shall station themselves there with you. And I shall come down and speak with you there, and I shall hold back some of the Spirit that is upon you and place it upon them. And they will bear with you the burdens of the people, and you yourself will not bear it alone. And to the people you shall say, 'Consecrate yourself for the morrow, and you will eat meat, for you wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, Who will feed us meat? For it was good for us in Egypt. And the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat. Not 1 day will you eat, not 2, and not 5, and not 10, and not 20 days, but a full month of days, till it comes out of your noses, and becomes a loathsome thing to you, inasmuch as you cast aside the Lord, who is in your midst, and you have wept before him, saying, Why is it we have come out of Egypt?' And Moses said, 600,000 foot soldiers are the people in whose midst I am, and you said, I shall give them meat, and they will eat a month of days. Will sheep and cattle be slaughtered for them and provide for them? Will all the fish of the sea be gathered for them and provide for them?" And the Lord said to Moses, "Will the Lord's hand be too short? Now you will see whether my word will come about or not." And Moses went out and spoke the Lord's word to the people, and gathered 70 men of the elders of the people, and stood them round the tent. And the Lord came down in the cloud, and spoke to him, and held back some of the Spirit that was upon him, and put it upon the 70 men of the elders. And it happened, as the Spirit rested upon them, that they prophesied, but did it no more. And 2 men remained in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, and the name of the other was Medad. And the Spirit rested upon them, and they were among those inscribed, but they did not go out from the tent, and they prophesied in the camp. And the lad ran to tell Moses, and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua, son of Nun, attendant to Moses from his youth, spoke out and said, My lord Moses, restrain them. And Moses said to him, Are you jealous on my part? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would place his Spirit upon them. And Moses was gathered back into the camp, he and the elders of Israel, and a wind moved onward from the Lord, and swept up quail from the sea, and left them over the camp, about a day's journey in every direction, all round the camp, and about 2 cubits deep on the ground. And the people arose all that day and all that night and all the next day, and gathered the quail. The most sparing gathered 10 homers, and they laid them out for themselves round about the camp. The meat was still between their teeth. It had yet, and I'm sorry, I went too far. So that's through about 32, through verse 32, and it really continues to just sort of flow on, and going into then into Numbers 12. So from the very beginning, we have really the the ongoing theme of the journey through the wilderness, which is the people really the community really failing at pretty much every challenge that is put before them pretty consistently. It's not going well, and Moses is having a hard time with it. This is very much a recurring theme, and especially as it is in many cases, and if this is a problem, you definitely hear about it. The central issue is food. So the people are the whole journey in the wilderness is this sort of extended rite of purification. It takes a long time, of course. There's a lot of time when Moses is away from the rest of the community, and that really Moses has this sole responsibility of leadership and prophecy and being the spiritual leader within the community and directing just about everything. And as you hear, and because this is the one exception, he's the one and only one who really with these very, very rare exceptions, the one and only one who is actually doing the active work of talking to and communicating to and from God. So really, anyone that Moses delegates authority to during the time, and keep in mind this is most of the time when he is away and not actively engaged in sort of governance, in sort of the affairs of just the everyday affairs of the people, anyone he delegates is of questionable authority, is of challengeable authority. Only he is of unchallengeable authority, and I would put that in quotes because, of course, his authority is challenged all the time, including notably here. So not only does every time Moses come down off the mountain or Moses come out of the places of prophecy, is he swamped by the squabbles and the everyday concerns of just keeping everything running appropriately, and then of course all these people with all this time on their hands fighting over various things. So he's swamped by those complaints. And then as that goes along, he's also swamped by his designated leaders who are unable to really do what they need to do to sort of to take that weight off of him, and that his designated leaders indeed are fighting with one another. And then, of course, he's being challenged. He's deeply challenged by his relationship with God, and the idea that at this point, years later, he's been doing this continuously, and that this was his part in life. Because, of course, Moses had kind of run away from responsibility. He was forced to, but had found what we reflect as being a very happy and quiet sort of pastoral life when he was found by God and called through the burning bush to lead his people out of slavery. Now, of course, what exactly that would entail to, of course, give freedom to his people, which sounds good and is good and must fundamentally be celebrated, and he jumped at the chance, though not without sort of caveat, not without challenge and difficulty from the very beginning through to the very end. It's the big ideas and the big hopes and the big dreams and the big aspirations in many things tend to get swamped and overrun by the sort of minor everyday concerns. It's actually a funny thing in a lot of sort of the grand events of history, or even sort of grand moments of history, are only grand and sort of transcendent in hindsight, or indeed grand and transcendent in hindsight to those who sort of happen to stumble upon them. I remember something reflecting on like the first, for those who are enthusiastic about that kind of thing, the first time particular pieces of music are played, the first time particular songs are sung, concertos or symphonies, or even someone as grand as your the first time Beethoven, when he was already somewhat famous, the first time his new pieces were performed, the orchestra generally wasn't really ready. The first night has the tendency, as anyone who's involved in theater knows, to be the last dress rehearsal. And these things are new and sort of really unknown and unheard, and people don't really know how to respond to them without sort of an established order of things. So it becomes strange, it becomes challenging. I remember hearing about grand events of like the Constitutional Convention, the signing of the Declaration was very improvised, and even nobody knew what exactly the big date was going to be. John Adams famously said that it must be July 2nd should be the great day of national celebration, but that's not the date that's written on the document, so that's not the date we celebrate. We celebrate July 4th. These impromptu ceremonies, these things put together with whatever's available. I mean, there have been all kinds of times when kings have been crowned with, or in dramatic situations, with the wrong crown, with an impromptu crown because the first one was damaged or wasn't available. The crown of Hungary is famously bent because someone in a hurry put it in the wrong box and closed the lid on it. The real grand events are always much more everyday and much more humble than we sort of imagine to be. And the transcendent majesty of these things is only because of a lot of people working very hard. Working very hard to do little, very sort of drudgery parts of work. So we have a whole bunch of these all colliding in this story, and we have sort of two parallel things going on, which is first off this grumbling and complaining about the lack of meat in the diet of the people. So, of course, first off, they've been eating manna in the desert for a long time, and the manna comes down from heaven, is gathered up, and makes sort of a sweet cake effect. It's described here as being sweet and also creamy like oil. That's clearly talking about your really, really high quality extra virgin olive oil, the very first pressing from an olive press is what the comparison is being drawn to. So that not that it is itself dry, but the complaint is that the food is dry, that it gives sort of a dry impression, that it perhaps leaves some sort of a taste in the mouth. But what's most significant, what's clearly being complained about most, is that the food is monotonous. That even something that's delicious every day becomes extremely boring and unpleasant. So the crying out is for meat, as it says, and then it gets into specifics, saying the fish we used to eat in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, and the leeks. So instead of this regular delicious food, at least in Egypt, even as slaves, they got a variety of food. And sort of the tradition in Egypt at the time was to have the platter, or the main dish, with a whole bunch of condiments in a whole bunch of different ways, which is all these different vegetables. So at least you had variety. You were slaves. You were getting the third class food, basically the table scraps from this incredibly rich, incredibly profitable country, which had this huge surplus of food, especially because of the huge harvest that could be expected, and just how teemingly rich the Nile was with life and with fish. So it's asking for meat. There's sort of a very much selective memory about the fish versus meat, and then more significantly, there's a selective memory for the fish we used to eat for free. A strange thing that only a few years removed, it would seem, from actual just hard crushing slavery. Boredom and monotony is seen to be worse than slavery with third class food that is admittedly has a little bit of variety in it. And basically Moses can't believe what he's hearing, and God can't believe what he's hearing. And so we hear again a description of what the manna is about, and we hear Moses wanting to be done with all of this. So the Lord lays out this plan by which authority can be more widely delegated. And as it turns out, of course, this delegation of authority doesn't actually continue through. It's just a momentary thing. And it actually doesn't really even help with the complaining in the community in general. Actually, there's a really funny combination that's probably an intentional, almost a pun, that Robert Alter in this scripture translation translates near the beginning. The riffraff in their midst felt a sharp craving, and the Israelites too again wept and said, "Who will feed us meat?" The riffraff is quite a word and has quite a pejorative and insulting tone to it, because he's translating a word that really, it's not the masses, it is the riffraff, it is the lower folk, the just nameless mass of people with no taste and no patience and apparently no memory of what things were actually like. And what's significant there, especially that doesn't come through in other translations, is contrasting the riffraff with the Israelites, that we hear a little bit later of this huge group of people, and there are a lot of non-Israelite hangers-on coming with this community. As of course it's not mentioned really anywhere else, though it's consistent throughout Scripture of talking about the resident alien, the non-citizen, the non-Israelite who's there with you, and a couple of them are named always, and they come up and are of some significance from time to time. But there must have been a lot, maybe even at least a significant number, if not maybe even the majority, of those who jumped on this opportunity of joining in this great slave escape, because really they didn't check your papers. They didn't have any discrimination on who could come with them in this liberation from slavery. And the Egyptians kept a lot of people other than the Israelites as slaves or in the serving classes, maybe even a whole bunch of Egyptians who had become disenchanted with everything that was around them and had been inspired by the ministry of Moses, or the community that the Israelites had joined with them. So it is the riffraff, perhaps, where this murmuring, where this complaining begins, the riffraff of non-Israelites, but it's clear that it just goes right through the camp, and that within no time at all, there's no distinction. It's not about the evil of non-Israelites or having foreigners in the camp. That's not the complaint. That's not the problem. But this word is being used in this insulting way then to talk about everyone who gathers together to complain, and when they get together, they only complain harder. And God's response to this riffraff is to have a gathering of the elders. Now, the word that is used for gathering is half of the word for riffraff, because the word for riffraff is as sometimes in English, it's a doubling. It's sort of doubling a word makes sort of an insulting phrase. So it's almost a sing-song, almost exactly like riffraff. You have an asafsuf. Asafsuf is translated as riffraff in this instance, and instead the gathering is just the asuf. So this is an intentional comparison between the insulted gathering and the official gathering, but that there's a recognition that something else needs to be done. If not necessarily, and because there's no actual reorganization of the structure of society, that something needs to be done to improve the perception of the structure of society. And so 70 people, 70 of the elders of Israel, 70 of the respected men of the community are chosen to share this burden. And in this great demonstration of unity, 70 gather together with Moses, and the spirit that was previously concentrated on Moses is divided among all of them, and they all prophesy all at once. So this is to be seen, to be heard, and especially to be talked about. And now every single one of those 70 are now close to God and can be trusted, or can not necessarily be trusted. There's all kinds of untrustworthy stuff going on, but it can be depended upon that people will go to them for like the small and petty things that those people can handle, that just takes common sense and a little calm arbitration, and that the decisions that those people made will actually be taken as reliable. Now, of course, the famous thing and what's actually highlighted in this particular passage about this instance is that not all 70 show up. Um, Perhaps even we hear specifically of these two, Eldad and Medad, who don't show up. They're just named this one time. You would sort of assume that these would be larger characters. There would be something recurring about them. But the 70 are called, and 70 names are apparently written down because that's what's talked about as being the 70 who were there. But not all of them show up. But two of them still feel the Spirit even though they didn't show up. We don't actually know if there were others who didn't show up who didn't feel the Spirit or who resisted it. But two were not only didn't bother to show up, but the Spirit still came to them when they were in the camp. So even more people saw and understood the significance of what was going on, though it was a momentary thing. And again, here we have actually Joshua, who will come to great significance later on, ran and to speak to Moses to say, to say they did it wrong. The folks out there have done what you asked them to do it wrong. And Moses is bewildered. Are you jealous on my part? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and the Lord would place his Spirit upon them. Now, this is familiar because it's in the Psalms. And in the Psalms, it's an frequent repeated that all the young men will see visions, and all the young women will dream dreams. That all people will prophesy. This is even highlighted. It's used in Handel's Messiah as part of the prophecy around Jesus, a part of the opportunity that comes with Jesus, that all people from all parts of society would have this opportunity. And of course, this would be that the psalmist is repeating what's written in Numbers as part of the story. Of course, actually, the Psalms were written before Numbers was written down. And this is, perhaps it was part of the story already, and this was an established thing that's repeated poetically in the Psalms, but perhaps it's the other way. Perhaps this is actually Numbers being compiled many hundreds of years after the fact and integrating this famous poem, thinking that if Moses didn't exactly use those words, he would have said something like that. He would have had a nice turn of phrase to answer those around him who are complaining so bitterly and so constantly. And then we have the end where the meat is delivered. The meat is made available, and it is that the wind of God, since God's sort of main effect is the breath of God, this wind of God that's translated sometimes as spirit, but it's really a different thing. And to put those as the two things, and we have them right next to each other, that the Spirit is on the people, on the elders, but the wind carries the quail. So it's one of God's main ways in which God actually enacts things in the world. And that the quail are 2 days journey out, piled 2 cubits deep, which is an incredible amount of quail. If there are 600,000, they say, foot soldiers, that means the young men of military age, suggesting that there are many times that many people in general, enough food to feed perhaps millions, which is almost certainly an exaggeration, but this is dramatic for effect. A cubit is this far, is from the end of your fingers to your elbow. So 2 of these deep, for miles in every direction, is an astonishing amount of quail. As God says, you will eat it and eat it and eat it for a month until it comes out of your nose, which is pretty clearly an expression that meant the same then as now, to stuff yourselves and to have your fill and then keep stuffing and stuffing and stuffing. And then there's some level of, and things don't go well after that because of this disobedience. So you have these 2 stories, those of the disobedience, or of the gathering and the sharing of the Spirit, along with the disobedience around food, being sort of interwoven in this cool way, with a couple of poetic turns of phrase, a couple of things that we have a hard time putting what comes first, a lot of references made to other parts of Scripture and references made back to this part. So it's actually really cool. Though it's got a whole bunch of the fury and the anger of God flashing and fire, and so it can be hard for us to read. But reading it all as a story with these 2 pieces interwoven make it more make it more, I was going to say fun, but make it much more interesting, make it more complete, make it more whole, and make it less really of sort of a neat and tidy little story that just parallels what's happening in the gospel this week. Because it's a lot more than that. It's a lot more interesting than that. Anyway, see you again next week. We'll be in worship 10 o'clock Sunday morning. We're going to be baptizing 2 people. Very excited for that. God bless.